Okay, so hi, my name is Heidy Canales, and I am interviewing Jesus. And then if you could pronounce your last name for me, because I don't
Sure.
want to.
My last name is Hinojosa.
Hinojosa, Hinojosa, on December 19th, 2021 at 5 p.m. So thank you again, Jesus, for taking the time to speak with me. Kind of to, preface the interview, I'm just going to ask you a really simple question, and then you can kind of take it wherever you want. But essentially, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? So, where you're from, where you were born, what city you grew up in, maybe a little bit about your family structure, as much as you want to share.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the time. So I was born in Los Angeles. I was born in Los Angeles back in '92. So now you can figure out how old I am. But I was born in Los Angeles. For the most part, I've always stayed in the LA area. I grew up in a city called Pico Rivera, southeast part of LA. Um, and it borders Whittier, borders Downey, and a couple other, I guess, bigger cities. Whittier's pretty well known, so is Downey. But I grew up in that area. Um, I lived in Pico most of my life, from I guess whatever I can remember from being born all the way up through most of my elementary school, and then we moved to Whittier for 1 year. Um, Before moving to Whittier, I was living in Pico. Like I said, I used to live with my parents. I have an older sister, who I jokingly call my younger sister because it's usually she's a little bit more, on the younger side, maturity wise, and things like that. So we lived with I lived with them, and I also lived with my grandparents, and we lived with quite a few of my cousins at the time. So at minimum, there was 5 cousins that were there, 4 boys, 1 girl, all varying ages. Some older than me, I think 1 or 2 younger than me. And then other times we had that set of cousins, and then another set of cousins lived there with us as well. So at any given time, a lot of people are always at grandma's house, but at any given time, there was probably, anywhere from 10 to 15 of our cousins there, just whoever was visiting or whoever lived with us. So we ended up moving for, like I said, a year. We went to Whittier, and my parents and my sister and we ended up moving into a garage with my aunt, and that was a very very strange time for me. Simply because I went from this big huge house, big household, family, friends, all that stuff, to now just basically 4 corners. And the garage wasn't really set up to be livable, but that's what we had at the time. And hey, whatever. Um, in that time though, I think my parents were saving up for a house. We ended up getting a house back in Pico, so we moved back to the city, just down the block or two, 2 blocks away or whatever it might be from my grandma's house. She still lived there, and then it was just the 4 of us that lived here for a little while. And then of course we had some family move in to our house and things like that. So kind of throughout my life, I've always had more people other than just my immediate family, my extended family, always around, which is, can be good and bad. There's always family drama and things like that. But also as a kid, you see, how close family can be or what priorities are. Um, so throughout that, my dad, for the most part, he ran his own business, um, fixing cars. It was an auto body shop. So he ran his own business, and that also meant that he didn't necessarily have like a regular schedule. So sometimes we would see him on the weekend, sometimes we wouldn't. Sometimes, he'd get home super late and leave super early, whatever it might be. And for a little while, my mom was a nurse actually in South Central LA, which is a little bit far from us considering the commute and things like that. I'm sure whatever it is that you heard of LA traffic is bad, but in reality, it's way worse. It's just always so much worse. So yeah, I didn't really always see my parents. One, because my dad was working, he had just crazy hours, and two, because my mom also was working, and the commute kind of interfered with that as well. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the gist of what it was like when I grew up. For a little while, my dad worked at a regular job, quote unquote, but it still was kind of the same. He'd do the regular job, then he'd go back to working on the cars or do whatever it might be. And that's pretty much kind of generally how I grew up. when I wasn't in school or when I had some free time, I would actually be with my dad working, on the cars, at the shop or whatever it might be. And my mom had ended up actually leaving her job as a nurse to help out with the shop. And so it was really all hands on deck whenever it could be. And a lot of times we even had cousins show up to the shop and work there. And um, some of my dad's friends, who I now call cousins or uncles or whatever it might be, no blood relation, they showed up to the shop, and a lot of times, they'd work with us and hang out with us, and they became family, and we still, have those contacts with them to today. So to answer your question, a little bit about me, I think, from LA, from East LA specifically, it's a little bit different area. It's a relatively medium, small kind of area, um, but that's kind of all I knew in my life. Really revolved around working on cars and basically just being around families for as much as I can. So
Would you say that despite all of the, movement with your family and all that stuff, like, would you say that you grew up like in a very close knit family?
I think to a certain extent, yeah, we always had family around. Again, whether they were actually blood related or not, there was always people there. But it was very tight knit amongst my immediate family, my parents and my sister. Um, we, every now and again we would see cousins, like I said, and they'd come over and things like that. But to me, I think it was just a little bit different. I would consider them, close, tight knit. But I think once I started to, grow up and kind of focus on, school or focus on being at the shop, although I kind of drifted maybe away from some cousins, things like that. For the most part, all of my family, I still feel a close connection to. So.
How would you say that played a role into your education? Like, do you think that they, put pressure on you in terms of, making sure that you did well in school and things like that, especially if you had a lot of, you know, same age groups, around you at the time? How did education kind of play a role into that?
So my parents were always very adamant about me doing well in classes. They would show up whenever they could to parent teacher conference, make sure I was, behaving. Not that I ever behaved, but there was a lot of things where my parents really pushed the issue of doing well in school from as far as I can remember, from elementary school throughout. Even when I was in high school, my parents wanted to show up to parent teacher conference, and oftentimes, my parents would be the only ones, and I'd be like, "Mom, what are you doing here?" Like, no one is showing up. We'd be the only ones there, but she wanted to be there. And even, when I would go to the shop, my dad would say, okay, well, you finish your homework, you do whatever it is that you have to do first. And then after that, then you can work on cars or you can hang out or do whatever it is. So education on my parents' perspective was a really big thing. In terms of my cousins and some of my other family members, uh, generally, not specifically just my cousins, but a lot of my family members, they didn't really, it's kind of strange to say, but I wouldn't say that they didn't care. They just didn't really see the importance of it. And I think that that might be common, whether it's, true or not, but I think that that's common from my side of the family, or my family rather, when we're talking about, people in my family who are blue collar workers, very labor intensive and things like that. And even to this day, my dad jokes with me, I have a job now. I sit at a desk, according to him, and I just play on the computer all day, right? And that's not what a quote unquote man should do when he's underneath, picking up cars, according to him, or doing whatever, right? And so, of course, it's all in jest, but it is one of those things where there is some, remnants of truth in the sense that there's some ideologies or some, sentiments that, people in my family, people in my kind of, my culture kind of feel like a man has to work, and work means physical labor. So when it comes to education, yeah, I think there was quite a few people who would say, well, why are you spending your time reading books, or why are you spending your time doing this, or whatever it might be, right? When are you really going to use math, or, all the other things that we've, heard, or, kind of reasons as to why to not put, focus on education. So yeah, I've heard it, and I've heard it from some of my family members and things like that. But I think that that's just an area for growth. I think that's just an area for growth. And I think that as we learn and progress, and I would hate to use the word assimilate, but when we start to understand the culture that we've now come from and now are part of, or immersed into a different culture, there's certain things that you can take and say, okay, well, that works, or this works here as opposed to this works someplace else, or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think that, on to some extent, there is a learning curve for everyone. So
If you don't mind me asking, what is your cultural background?
that's a that's a difficult question to answer. I think that it really plays, into how you identify and things like
Right.
that. So I'm second generation Mexican American. My parents were born here in the United States. My mom is a English language learner, so Spanish was her first language, and the reverse is true for my dad. My dad's first language was English, and then he picked up Spanish after the fact. But my grandparents on both sides were all born in Mexico.
Okay.
So for me, my cultural identity, or whatever, my cultural background, it's very much a Chicano background, Mexican American background. But even that, more so specifically, as I, learn and read and I continue to find myself, because I think that identity is kind of an evolving thing. So is education. Um, I think as I continue to learn and grow, I don't really necessarily say, "Oh, I'm only just Mexican American," because I think that that still um, starts to really emphasize, or at least pay homage to a lot of the European ancestry. And although, hey, I can't necessarily deny those things, but I think even to a certain extent, um, there's no deny. Someone looks at me and like, yeah, obviously you might be Mexican if you're from LA, but really, I'm at least I think I'm as Mexican as Mexican comes, and really that's not being Mexican, that's being indigenous.
Yeah.
So really being from the area. So when you ask me what my cultural background is, I think more so of it being, Chicano, if anything. It's a political mindset, an ethnic background, a set of values or priorities that I hold near and dear to my heart. Not so much race based, but
Yeah.
understanding that the the indigenous blood that courses through my veins is very much a part of me, and how I view the rest of the community. So
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. As someone who also kind of struggles to answer that question sometimes, like, um, I'm very much interested in trying to, learn more about, my indigenous roots and whatnot. How do you think that that has played a role in terms of like, maybe your education in general? Like, do you think that that's something new that you've kind of taken an interest in, or has it always kind of been in the back of your mind?
it's always been in the back of my mind, really. And I think that for me, I think that knowing a little bit about my uh, indigeneity growing up allowed me to really fall in love with math, right? And I was a kid, I think about, the Aztecs and the Mayans and the pyramids and all the engineering. I think, well, they can do it. Why can't I do it, right? And I think, these, people were engineers, astronomers, whatever it might be. Their math, their science was just out of this world. And I think to myself, well, if it's, culturally part of my history, then why not? So yeah, that's definitely pushed me on that realm. And I think even going to a Penn State where, although you have different perspectives from students and even different perspectives from professors and things like that, the vast majority of education is really from what I've seen, at least, a European standpoint. Um, I know this is not a book review in this interview, but I'm currently reading this book right now, and it specifically talks about how when European colonizers came to what is now modern day Mexico and the Mayan civilization, they started to notice that a lot of the pyramids, a lot of the streets, they were just so ever off. They didn't really have 90-degree angles. They didn't really have anything, according to the Europeans, that was perfect. It was always just subpar, just a little bit off from perfect, right? And so their initial thought was, man, maybe I'm paraphrasing, I'm trying to get into their mind, but it really was, they're not good at math. Not until they realized that after the fact, those little small errors weren't errors at all. They were done purposely to specifically be set up to be aligned with, the way that the sun shone or how the stars reflected or line up with whatever it might be, right? So there was this idea of, math, engineering, and nature kind of coexisting that some of these European colonizers just didn't really understand at the time. And so how that played a role into my education, whether it's at Penn State, whether I was doing my master's program or even doing, my law school, my JD, it's just, although they may be considered the authority, that doesn't make them always right. I still have the option to have an opinion. I still have the option to explore other alternatives. And even reading, some of the things that they're giving me, I can say, hey, well, where did you get this from? Where's your truth coming from? There's an idea, and you ask a con law professor, because I don't know about all of them, but I asked my con law professor, and I said, hey, I've read someplace that the US Constitution, the way that the government is set up, is actually an idea kind of borrowed from the Iroquois Nation. Is that true? And his first response is, no, it can't be. These people learn from European philosophers. And I think that the constant disregard or constant ignoring of the actual relations, or the actual kind of mixing, for lack of a better term, the trading of ideas here is often overlooked to favor one side, right? And so again, while I was at Penn State, I think about these things on a day-to-day. When I was there, I think about how some of these things play into how I'm perceived, right? And I'm sure you're well aware, and it's not any shocker to anyone, but Penn State, as a PWI, predominantly white institution, someone like me walks in and automatically I don't look like the normal student, right? And so yeah, I've had to really grapple with those things and kind of look at it from a lens of the cultural component. But again, to answer your question, how did that shape my education? It really shaped it in the sense of, just because they say this is right doesn't actually mean that it's right.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What were kind of your favorite classes growing up? So you mentioned math. So I'm assuming that you had an interest in math or science or just STEM in general growing up, but I don't want to just assume.
Sure. No, I really did enjoy math. I'll tell you right now, I absolutely hated reading. I hated writing. I could not wrap my head around these things. I could not wrap my head around grammar. It didn't interest me. I loved math. I really tried to like science. But like I said, I was a misbehaved kid, and all of middle school, elementary school, high school. It got to a point where in high school, for my Chem teacher, we would get kicked out. Me and a couple of friends, we would get kicked out every single day. He'd take roll and he said, okay, you four, see you later, get out of my class. And we would just have to, wander the halls or whatever it might be, right? And now looking back at that, I kind of think, man, the teacher, he did a disservice to me. Was I being, misbehaved kid? Absolutely. But there's still, a disconnect. As a minor, as a high school student, I don't know any better, right? To a certain extent, you might say, hey, well, you probably do know right from wrong. But again, there was still a disservice on my end. So in all of my schooling, primary and secondary education, I really struggled with reading a lot. Until this day, I feel as though, they call it imposter syndrome. I think it's just, some sort of self-doubt. I don't know that it's a syndrome per se, but I still feel as though I have to double check everything that I've read, everything that I write. And now that's all I do for work. As a lawyer, all I do is read and write and draft papers and draft pleadings and research. And I still hate it to this day. It makes me feel stressed out, and I get hot, and I kind of, all those physical manifestations of stress. So to this day, still don't like reading and writing, but I do it. I force myself, right? And I think that's a big key. Absolutely love math. Absolutely love math. I wish I can do it. And so I practice bankruptcy law now, and bankruptcy law is a lot of math, finances. And so that's why I was like, okay, if anywhere I'm going to be practicing, law, I've kind of narrowed it down, but this one's got math. Cool. I'm comfortable with that. I'll go into that. So the science, I liked it. I didn't have a chance to really enjoy it though, if that
Right.
makes sense. Because like I said, I got kicked out a lot. It wasn't comfortable. And you might say, oh, well, you only got kicked out of one class, but it was a domino effect. At that point, you get kicked out your first year or second year of classes, and you're just like, well, I didn't learn things from beforehand. I'm frustrated because now I don't know them here, and it's just a very vicious cycle, if you will.
Yeah.
There was a lot of electives that we had. I really enjoyed music as a kid. I used to play the drums, and so I thought that that was going to translate into me enjoying marching band. Wasn't great. I did it because I enjoyed music. I enjoyed playing drums, but it wasn't a class that I really looked forward to.
What
Um,
would you say is like, what did you want to be when you grew up? When you were in maybe like elementary school or in middle school and then high school, do you kind of remember what you said you would wanted to be?
Yeah, well, not so much in elementary school. I mean, I want to say that I wanted to be a lawyer, but I don't know. I remember my parents would watch movies and they'd be like, astounded by, a lawyer doing a closing argument or, showing off how smart he is or how smart she was or whatever it was, right? And so I always want to be like, well, I want to do that. I'm this, but I can't say for certain that's what I wanted to do. When I was in middle school, because that's about the time, I really got into music, I want to be a rock star. I want to be a drummer for a famous band or, do something along those lines. But I don't know. I didn't have enough friends that were willing to play and play with me, whether it be guitar or bass, whatever. Like I always kind of felt like, I had a certain skill set, but really there was no one else that I can explore that route with. So it kind of fizzled out. Um, and you know, kind of sidetrack, but at Penn State, I actually played the drums for an event, and I thought that was super cool. So yeah, I still have that love for music. And then in high school, because I got really involved with building cars, and actually, with my dad, I restored a car. My first car, we restored a like an early '50s Chevy, and we made it all custom and kind of did all kinds of crazy stuff. And so I was like, man, this is just math. This is just science. I know what I want to do. I want to be the one who designs cars. And so you see in the commercials, the engineer, whatever it is that their title is, they're kind of carving out the clay and revealing the car underneath. And that's what I wanted to do. And I thought, this is it. This is my ticket. My love for cars. I'm gonna do that. And so I ended up, applying to Penn State as an engineer because I thought that's what it was gonna, that's what I was gonna do. And then I was like, well, I hear aerospace engineers make a lot more money, so I want to do that. It's because I want to make a lot of money. And then I found out that I was not actually going to be carving clay, that I would be sitting at a desk for the rest of my life. And I was like, no, I can't do that.
Yeah.
So I ended up not going that route. But that's what I wanted to be when I was in high school.
Right. Do you think that the people around you supported those dreams at their various stages, or do you think
Oh
they
yeah.
were more of like a practicality in the background, if that makes sense?
No, I think I very much so believe that my parents supported my decisions. My dad opened up his own business, and it kind of, we open it up, we close it kind of throughout. So this idea of taking chances and just doing whatever it took, not necessarily having a, quote unquote safety net, was definitely an idea kind of already embedded in me. If I fail, then so what? I failed. Pick myself back up, try something else, right? And I think that was even the same mentality when I went to Penn State, because there was a lot of teachers that would tell me, "What are you going to go to Penn State for? You're going to fail. And you're going to be back here at community college just like everyone else." I'm like, "Oh well, I'll try. I want to at least see the world or whatever it is, right?" And I didn't. So jokes on them. I guess I got 2 degrees from Penn State. But yeah, this idea of just taking chances, it's for me, it's nice to have that support. And I think that the only people that I need that support from were my parents, and they would always support me in any of those dreams that I wanted to kind of pursue. But that didn't mean everyone, supported me. I had a lot of family members. Like I said, I had teachers that would tell me about not going to Penn State, but I had a lot of family members that would tell me, what are you going to go to Penn State for? So you could be a failure over there too, or whatever it might be. And again, those are the types of things we say, okay, that's fine. If I fail, I'm already expected to be a failure. Who cares? I'm already in someone else's mind. I'm already screwed up anyway.
Yeah.
So why not take that shot? What do I got to lose? Some time. It'll be a cool story, or it'll be a fun moment to have and to play in the snow at Penn State or go to a football game or do whatever it is that Penn Staters do. Yes, you're going to study hard, but Penn State's, according to me, Penn State's unofficial model was, study hard, play hard. And I wanted that experience. I wanted that experience. And having even a small option to kind of, taste that dream, I took it. I took it. So.
Did anyone in your family attend like university or vocational school?
No, not to my knowledge. At least no one that was close with my family when I was growing up. So I don't know. Like I said, when I was growing up, my parents didn't go to college. My mom got her associate's degree from a community college. So although my mom is, educated far beyond high school, it wasn't the same in terms of going to a 4-year university. I don't know anyone in my family who went to vocational school or trade school or anything like that. And I don't want to say, I'm the reason for that, but I do see, at least in my family, an upswing and some of my cousins, my younger cousins, who are now starting to go to school. So I don't want to take credit for it, but I think that if they saw at least, hey, Jesus did it, I can do it. Psh, great. That's definitely what I want. And they don't necessarily have to be my family members. They could be whoever else, whoever else might be watching this video on later on, so.
Exactly. So what would you say like kind of led to your decision in terms of even considering college in the first place? Like, I mean, your family had a business, like you liked cars. So what ultimately motivated you to want to pursue college?
Well, I didn't. I didn't. My parents were really pushing. My mom, I did well in high school. I was in the AP class, there's the honors classes, and a lot of it came easy. And I think that some of the professors, that's probably why they thought it was silly of me to go. I would be in some of my math classes, and I'd finish the assignment while the teacher was doing their lecture, and I'd finish it 15, 20 minutes, and I put my head down. I'm going to sleep, whatever, right? So I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to do college or anything, but my parents were like, no, like you need to do something, and I figured, okay, well, I'll give it a shot, and I was like, okay, if I want to go, I want to go for this, I want to go for that, and whatever it might be. And there's a lot of great schools here in California, but I grew up poor. So for me, I was like, I can't see spending $50, $100, whatever it is on fee applications. Every school, they charge $60, $100, $200. So if I applied to one school, that's, in my mind, as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 17, I'm still in high school, I'm thinking, I don't have that kind of money. And I can't ask my parents for that kind of money. So for the most part, I applied to all the different schools in California for whatever one gave me a fee waiver, right? And so I don't know if it's because when I took my SAT scores or my ACT scores, they sent them to all the different colleges. But at some point, I started getting an influx of mail from different schools, and I'm sure it's the same with most people. It was like apply now, apply here. Here's the deadline, whatever it might be. And Penn State sent me one. And it says, if you apply by, I think it was like February 1st or January 1st. If you apply by January 1st, we're going to waive your fee application. If you apply by January 1st or whatever deadline it was, you don't have to write a personal statement. If you apply by this deadline, we'll give you, priority admission or whatever. So I'm reading this and I'm thinking to myself, I don't have to pay and I don't have to write. It's like the bane of my existence as a high school student, writing essays. Are you kidding me? I think the last final that I had in high school for my English class as a senior, I think I got a D+ on my last essay. I was a terrible writer, and I probably still am to this day. But I was like, oh, this is too good to be true. Let me apply. And it said like, get a letter of recommendation. And so I had, a good rapport with a lot of my teachers as well. So, I wasn't necessarily hated by a lot of my teachers.
It's not the science teachers.
Yeah, just some of the science teachers. But, I was, I wouldn't say a class clown. I don't know that I'm that funny, but there's definitely a few teachers that I've gotten kicked out for. I had to make amends, whatever. But I asked, some of my teachers from my sophomore year, my junior year, I said, hey, I want to go to Penn State, or at least I think I want to go to Penn State. Can you write me a letter of recommendation? This is, and I explained it to him too. I don't have to pay for a fee application. I don't have to write an essay. But if I write an essay, can you at least look it over and correct it for me or whatever it might be? And so they're like, no, we're not doing that. That's against, ethics or whatever. I was like, okay, well then write me a letter of recommendation. So as soon as I got that letter of recommendation, I started sending out applications everywhere. And Penn State wasn't the only place that sent me the information. I got into Penn State. Penn State wasn't my number one. I don't think I ever had a number one school in mind. But I got into Wake Forest. I got into some of the UCs, some of the Cal States. Um, just whoever sent me a waived fee application, I applied, and I said, I'm gonna apply to as many schools because again, no one in my family had ever gone to a university, so I didn't know how to compare what I had grade wise, SAT, ACT score wise. I didn't know where I could get into, so I just applied everywhere, and eventually, after I got my acceptance letters and kind of narrowed it down, I ended up deciding on Penn State for about 3 reasons. I had an uncle who was kind of in and out of our lives as a kid, but he had told me that Pennsylvania is one of the most beautiful states that I'll ever see. He hitchhiked across the United States a couple times. So he, probably like in his hippie days or whatever it was, right? So I said, okay, I'll try it. And then I had another uncle who actually passed right before going to Penn State. But I was asking him, like, hey, like, what do you think? What should I do? And blah, blah, blah. And he told me basically along the lines of, if you don't leave, you'll be here forever, just like me, that I never left. And so I thought, okay, well, I can always come back. But, if I don't leave now, I may never leave. I may never get a chance to explore the world. And one of the other things was, again, there's a lot of great schools here in California. Um, I don't consider them, my top school, but a lot of people really dig the idea of going to SC or UCLA or Berkeley or Stanford or any of these schools. But what they have in common with Penn State is there's this huge name behind it. Wherever you go, people know of Penn State. And I thought to myself, okay, well, I don't really have any interest in going to these schools. They're great schools, whoever goes there, great. That's good on them. But if I go to a school, I want it to be a good, well-known school, school where I can feel like it doesn't matter what degree I have. It doesn't matter what I do. Just knowing that I went to Penn State makes me proud, makes my family proud. And so that played a huge part in my decision ultimately to go to Penn State. But it really was, you know, me weighing all the different options of, do I want to stay in LA for the rest of my life? Do I want to short myself and not taking a chance on life? And, even if this works out or doesn't work out, is it worth it to have a Penn State name behind, so.
What was it like, when you finally, packed up your bags, you're getting ready to come to State College? How was that feeling? Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, I definitely do. There was 2 times actually. I don't know if they still do it. I don't remember the name, but there was basically like a placement test that you had to do to see what classes that you would test into or could register for. Um, so that testing period or whatever it might be, I don't really remember. It was like mid-Jan or mid-July rather. So it was like right around Arts Fest. My birthday is July 10th. And so I was telling my parents, hey, I got to go to do these placement tests or whatever. If y'all want, we can check out, Penn State. I had never been there before. I just accepted. I was like, I don't care what it looks like. Right? Probably, very crazy thought at the time, but that's just, I guess, how I did it. When I was a kid, I ended up getting bit by a Rottweiler. And the guy who owned the dog was friends with my dad. He was a customer, and he's like, hey, I'm dying of cancer, sue me, please. Just let's get this straight away, excuse me, words, let's get this squared away, but that way your son is taken care of or whatever. So when I turned 18, the settlement funds from this dog bite hit my bank account, so I got paid out like $10,000. And so I told my dad, listen, like, we're going to Penn State. I just got my check from my dog bite. We can do this. I'll pay for, some portion of it, and then we can figure out the rest. So he's like, okay, well, if you want, like, let's go, we'll go with you. And so I said, okay. And he says, well, and we'll bring your uncle, because I guess at the time he was working in education or something. And so I was like, okay. So it was my parents, myself, my cousin, and my uncle. Were, my uncle was like 6 something. He's a big dude, probably like 280 pounds. And we jump in this tiny little Yaris. It fits like 3 people comfortably. But now we got 5 of us all squished into this car on a road trip from California to Penn State. All of our luggage is, packed into this car. And I'm thinking the entire time, there's no turning back. I don't know what happens if I don't like it. What happens if, I don't place. I don't know, but there is no turning back. And as we cross through states, that feeling, some days it got worse, some days it got better. Some days I kind of thought to myself, well, at least we're going on a fun road trip, And so when I finally got there, I did my testing, and it was Arts Fest. So there was a lot of people, and I'm thinking, man, like everyone's happy. Of course, everyone's drunk because it's Arts Fest. So what do I know, right? And so, because we didn't know anything about Penn State, Arts Fest was going. We didn't know Arts Fest was a thing, but everyone's happy to be there. And I'm like, man, this is the place to be. Like it's cool. And so we ended up taking my tests. I got my classes. Everything's great. Everything's looking up. So we ended up driving back to California, and on the way, because everyone wants to know, everyone wants to be part of this experience now, we ended up buying little trinkets and gifts for everyone along the way. We stopped in Chicago, I think we stopped in New Mexico and Vegas, I don't know, just but when we came back, everyone's like completely super supportive, right? Who knows, maybe that's because they got gifts and stuff, I don't know. But then I had to go back and actually start class. So there we were, my parents and myself. And I think this time it was just us 3, but we went, just the 3 of us. We went to Penn State and we moved in. I didn't really have much. I figured, well, what could I possibly take? Just clothes, a book bag, some notes or whatever. I think the first time that I ever got a cell phone was when I went to Penn State. The world. So we got all of our stuff. I moved in, and my dad's like, okay, let's go have dinner. So they put me in supplemental housing, and there was 4 roommates. I only saw one when we got there. So I said, okay, well, if this is how the room's set up, I claim this bed. This is my little drawer. This is my space in the closet. This is, all these things. We went to dinner. And so my parents were finally going to head out, and we came back to my room, and someone else had moved in, and they had moved all of my stuff. They took everything off of the hangers and they put it on a different bed that I had claimed. They took all my stuff out of the drawers. They put it on a different bed that I claimed, and they moved all my stuff and they put it in a different corner. And so when I got there, casually, this person and their family is just hanging up stuff where I had basically put all of my things. And so I was like, okay, like, what do I do now? This is what's going on. And so, my dad really doesn't like to admit it, but he's a pretty scary guy, I would say, if you didn't know him. But he pulls me aside and he goes, so you have a choice here. You have a decision to make. You can tell this guy to move all your stuff back, or do whatever, and
Oh my God.
or you can just leave it, but realize that from here on out you're going to have problems. So I was like, well, I'm not really trying to get kicked out of Penn State my first day. I'm not going to try and physically hurt this guy. I'm not going to move his stuff. I didn't really know what to do, but that was my welcome to Penn State moment.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. I'm just in shock. Because I don't know how I would have reacted either. That's crazy. Oh my gosh.
That was my welcome to Penn State moment. So it was supplemental housing. And so I did tell the guy, like, hey man, I don't really know you. Obviously, want to get on the right foot. I put all my stuff here. We got here before you. Someone got there before me. Um, his name was PU. So PU had already gotten there, and he was a really cool guy. But he was telling me, no one else had showed up yet. So I was the second one to show up. I put all my stuff. And the third guy, I don't really remember his name, to be quite honest, but I was telling the third guy, hey man, I had already put my stuff up there. I appreciate if you could have anywhere else. The 2 spots are already taken. You can have anywhere else. Um, and so what ended up happening, I think, was later on that week, he ended up moving his stuff. But later on during the week, I think his mom complained that he was in supplemental housing or something. Excuse me. I'm gonna grab some water. But yeah, he ended up moving out, and then I never saw him again. So, but yeah, that was my welcome to Penn State moment. And I thought to myself, man, if this is really how it's gonna be, I don't know if I could last here.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Would you say that you're because I'm pretty sure, okay, so after you came for Arts Fest, clearly you had some great, expectations for what your time at Penn State was going to be like. So what would you say those expectations were right before you moved in and then right after?
So right before, I thought it was going to be, obviously it's going to be a learning experience, and obviously I knew I was going to have to work hard and do all those things, right? But I thought it was going to be much more welcoming. But then after that experience, I was like, oh no, that that expectation or that facade just quickly faded. And there was other things throughout. A lot of people on my floor, they were great. A lot of people were cool to be around, hang out with. But then there was also comments they probably didn't necessarily intend on making, but they were backhanded compliments or whatever it might be. So, and again, it's not, I don't think it's exclusive to Penn State. You're going to find these things everywhere. I've experienced them, even now as a lawyer, I've experienced things along the same vein. But it is one of those things where it's like, yeah, it definitely changed my perspective. And it's a lot different for me because Penn State isn't my home area. If I experience any of those things here and now, being from LA, in LA, who cares? Like, I'm comfortable being here, but being so fresh, so new to Penn State, it was just taken back. Like, man, this is interesting. I didn't realize, I was gonna have to deal with this, so soon, and so so blatant.
Yeah. Do you feel like the people that you met, let's say let's putting like a time frame within your first year, do you think that people that you met had an understanding of like you, just kind of like, not even like, you being, a person of color, but you being from like LA or being from California?
Yeah, I think there was definitely an understanding, or an acknowledgement at least, right? I don't know that anyone could truly understand what it would feel like, because there was another person from LA on my floor, but this person was from West LA, and that's Beverly Hills, Thousand Oaks, Valley area. So even at that, maybe you're from the same city, but different socioeconomic status, different cultural background, So yeah, I think people acknowledge, or at least, to a certain extent, understood who I was or where I came from in my first year. But really what I started to, kind of maybe myself more is understand and draw parallels between some of the people that I had met that were from Philly. And I think most of my friends throughout Penn State were all from Philly or all from big cities or from New York,
Yeah.
Because they understood. And I think that's really, kind of what it boiled down to. I was from a big city in LA, and, there was a lot of similarities, a lot of things, that happened there, or a lot of the people who were from the same kind of socioeconomic status, but in Philly, New York, or in Chicago, wherever it might be, right? When I came home my first year or my second year, my parents were kind of like, hey, obviously you pick up some slang, you pick up, the vernacular or whatever it might be. But when I was speaking Spanish with some of my family, they'd be like, hey, you picked up a lot of like Puerto Rican Spanish. You picked up
Yeah.
Spanish. And I was like, well, I hang out with a lot of Puerto Ricans and Dominicans over there. There was a lot of Mexicans out at State College, and I'm sure there still are a lot of Mexicans out of State College because of Kennett Square. But the Mexicans out in State College or at Kennett Square, a lot of them were more so from the ranch in Mexico, or they were ranch life, or they were probably more rural area. And so for me, that was from a city, I didn't really have a lot in common with them. And not to say that it was their fault or my fault, but it was clear that there just wasn't as much overlap between them and I, and say some of my friends who were from Puerto Rico, or from even from Puerto Rico, that were from these bigger cities, or from Philadelphia, that were from these bigger cities, or from New York. So yeah, there was drastic difference in my relationship with some of the Mexicans and my relationship with some of the other Latinos there, and basically where they were from. So.
Yeah, no, for sure. Do you think that after, because you started kind of, touching on, you found people that you could relate to, found people that, you know, kind of understood what you were, experiencing at Penn State. Overall, do you think that you had friends that you could share your culture with, though?
Oh, definitely. I think that even individuals who didn't share my same culture, there was always an opportunity. Maybe it wasn't, you know, timing wise when I needed it, because of course you miss home. But there was always some way somehow that I can share my culture with other people. Even to this day, I see some of the Penn Staters, my friends, whoever it might be, some of um, my buddies from Penn State that we've met out in LA, we've met out in Vegas, we've met out in Miami, whatever it might be. So yeah, there was always an opportunity for me to share my culture, either on a small scale or even on a large scale. Latino Caucus, and I'm not sure if they still do it or not, but they used to have the Noche Latina, where they named the Mr. and Mrs. Latino Penn State, and I think that's a great opportunity to share whatever it is Latino culture is, quote unquote, because that's not really a homogenous group, or it's not all the same across the board. But even at that, when these candidates are up there, they're afforded the opportunity to express their own specific unique culture and identity, and I think that's a great opportunity. um, and then of course you have some of these organizations that throw parties, or some of these organizations that host events, and I think at one point, MASA, the Mexican American Student Association, would hold loteria night, or hold some of these other things that people would be allowed to either learn about specific aspect of a culture, or they would have a chance to express themselves through that. So.
How would you say that you kind of kept grounded to your roots, here in Penn State?
um I'm not gonna lie, I called my mom like every day. That was one of the things I needed to talk with her, just to check up on her, because I knew, home life here never went away, right? They struggled, they had their own things here. So I called to check up on her, and if I was going through something, whether I was stressing out over a test, or, whatever it might be, I would call and say, hey, mom, this is what I'm going through, blah, 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 blah. Or if I was still, if I was good, and then call them, hey, how's everything with you guys? How's the business? How are you guys financially? How are you guys, emotionally? How are things? So that was definitely one thing. The other thing is creating a family at Penn State. There's a lot of people who are looking for that, because not everyone who goes to Penn State is from Pennsylvania. As I said before, there was a lot of people who were from Puerto Rico, from New York, from these other areas, and not always they can go home. I think my first Thanksgiving or my second Thanksgiving, I stayed out on the East Coast. Um, and so having the ability to meet friends, and which later became family to me, really allowed me to stay grounded, because they knew, oh, Jesus is from LA. He's kind of got a certain way how he speaks or how he dresses. Things might be a little bit funny about him, but they were cool with that, and they accepted me for who I was, and vice versa. Because I would tell them too, like, hey, you guys kind of weird. You guys do this, or you guys, do that. So it was all in fun, but still, kind of creating that family there, um, is definitely a key way for me to stay grounded. And I think also just, at the end of the day, just being conscious or being, very driven about why you're here. What exactly are you doing here at Penn State, right? I needed to get my degree and be out so that I can start being self-sufficient, or at least, doing what it is that I wanted to do, whatever that looked like, right? And so when I went through something at Penn State, whatever it might have been, stress, anxiety, if I didn't do well on a test, because there was a lot of tests that I didn't do well on, I would always think to myself, okay, this one wasn't a winner. I, I bombed the exam, or whatever it might be, but this ain't over. It's not over just yet. We still got some time here. There was a time where, Penn State, one of my counselors pulled me aside and said, "Hey, listen, your bursar bill is due, and it doesn't look like you're going to be able to get financial aid. You can pull out loans, but you're better off just dropping out of Penn State." And so okay, well, give me a week and figure it out. So I talked with my, hey, how do we get this thing off the ground? And ultimately, I ended up finding someone who would co-sign my loans for me, and it happened to be another Penn State student. And so for me, finding that family, finding all those things to keep me grounded, I think even in the end, allowed me to realize again what I was there for, to get the degree, or to finish, basically, whatever it took to finish. So
Yeah. What ended up being your field of study here at Penn State?
I studied economics and psychology. So I did econ and psych. I was an aerospace engineer. First year, transferred out of that because I couldn't cut it. I didn't know physics because my physics teacher in high school just didn't really allow us, or didn't really work with us, basically how we learn best. And I didn't understand chemistry because my chem teacher kicked me out every day.
Right.
So I knew how many electrons or neutrons or whatever it is were in an atom, but that was it. That was the extent of my my science education.
Better than me, because I still couldn't tell you.
So, but yeah, I aerospace, transferred out to psych, and then that same counselor, I think, was telling me, hey, well, if you do psych, you'll never make any money with just a psych degree. So I was like, okay, well, I'll find something else. And I was like, well, economics. I dig it. I like it. I wouldn't say it came easy to me because I struggled in a lot of my econ classes, but it was a soft science that had some more math than psych, and some of the things that I felt, kind of a strong skill set with. So I ended up doing economics and psych.
How did you end up deciding that? Like econ? Well, actually, no, psych. How did that transfer occur?
Well, I took a psych class in high school and I really liked it. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe this is something I can explore. I took a couple courses my first year before transferring out. But what really sold me was the psych degree at Penn State had a business option. And so it allowed me to really start kind of thinking about everything more so from like a business aspect of it, but from like an actual like official or formal teaching of business. I learned, some aspects of business from my dad, from his small business, and watching him interact with other people. So I learned a little bit about business, but never in a formal setting. So when I saw that psych degree that it had a business option, I was like, okay, this might be where I go. And then when I was told I'll never make any money, I was like, well, I didn't come here to be broke and then have student debt. So let's see what else I can do. So I ended up, kind of exploring my options. And because I already had a business option with the psych, I saw that a lot of those overlap with econ. And I was like, well, it's still money, banking, and it's still, math essentially.
Yeah.
So let's do it. That's the one. That's where I'm gonna go. And that's it. That's how I ended up going that route.
What was kind of your favorite places to study on campus? So I'm sure you had those long nights in aerospace engineering.
Yeah.
Where would you find yourself on campus?
My go-to spot was always third floor paternal. Third floor paternal. They had individual desks along the windows on the perimeter of the building. So I'd go to the third floor and get my cup of coffee and my bagel or my donut or whatever, and I'd set up camp there wherever I could find a little desk, and that's it. And I just grind away on the days that I needed to really kind of lock in and study. So that was one. Um, I didn't really, per se look to study anywhere else, but I did group projects. So they had the glass meeting rooms. I think there's one on third floor paternal. It's been so long since I've been on campus. I don't know if they've ever changed, but there's a couple meeting rooms that here and there. So that was the other thing too. A lot of times I was the one who was running meetings with Latino Caucus or with Masa or PRSA or whoever it was, or Latino Council, and the list of orgs goes on and on and on. But a lot of times what I would do is I would reserve the room for the meeting and then reserve it for an extra hour or 2 hours. And then when everyone left, I'd still stay there and I'd still study. Because people after the meeting were over, they'd go do their own thing. But everyone else that wasn't part of that meeting, they would see the little, placard on the door, little paper on the door that would say reserved for the meeting. Or, it would be a lot easier to say, hey, someone walked in, oh, this be, room's reserved, sorry, we have a meeting. Just keep studying.
Yeah. What would you say were your go-to places around State College? So not necessarily on campus, but downtown and the other surrounding areas of State College.
Yeah, I mean, it's not super huge, but I used to work at Mad Mex. So I would go to Mad Mex. My buddy, who I ended up being roommates with, I think twice throughout Penn State, he also worked at Mad Mex, and they'd go to a couple other places, so I'd hang out with him. I had a buddy who worked at the Gaff, so we got into the Gaff a lot. I don't know. I had a friend that worked at Penn Kebab, so he would always get me a sandwich for free or things like that. But really, I was wherever I could be. I don't know that I had one spot oh, this is my place to be. I always, if I was out, then I wanted to be out. I wanted to be everywhere. I wanted to just do whatever I can or go with whoever. I really liked the pool a lot when I was at Penn State. So over the summers when no one was, in downtown, we'd go to Sharky's and shoot pool for a little while. But yeah, it just depended on, what people wanted to do. I don't know that I ever had a place to, to say, hey, this is my spot, this is where I go. But yeah, I mean, in downtown, go out wherever.
What about food?
I mean, I just eat everything, If someone had middle points, we'd go to West because the cookies, West Commons. I remember there was a time where Friday nights as a freshman, my thing was to get a cheesesteak. And that always was, a decision I regretted on Saturday because my stomach would hurt. But that's what you would do. People really like Gumby's because the pizza or the sticks, pokey sticks or whatever they're called. I don't know, just the wings over to this day. I think that's one of the all-time favorites, the wings. But no, I don't know that there's any one place I'm like, oh man, I gotta go. People go to the cafe for the skillet fries. And I don't know. For me, like I said, I'm a fat kid, so I eat anything or everything. I don't care. Whatever people wanted to eat, let's do it. Especially if I had money. If I had money, then okay, cool, let's go.
Let's go.
Yeah. But there's a lot of times. Yeah, there's a lot of times too. It's like I got $10 for this weekend, so I don't know how we're gonna do it, but we're gonna make it work. $10 for the whole weekend. Let's go. So, yeah.
That is really how it is. Oh my God. Speaking of money though, did you have a job while you were here in Penn State?
Yeah, I worked every year.
Mad Mex.
I worked at Mad Mex. I worked at the quarter room as a dishwasher, but after like 3 weeks, I was like, nah, this ain't me. I didn't I didn't particularly care for how they treated their staff, to be quite honest. Um, they were cool people, but just management, just I was like, I'm over it. Not for $7 an hour or whatever it
Right.
was, but the job that I did the longest, and although I didn't really see it as a job anymore, I think that's where I got to meet a lot of people. I worked, I'm trying to remember the name. I worked at it was through like a student work something. I don't know. So it was through the school. But it was an offsite campus where they placed you. And I think it was like AR literature or something reading or whatever. But basically, what the organization does is it pairs a student with someone who doesn't speak English or doesn't speak English well, that's working on their skills. And you'd set up a meeting with them or whatever they wanted to do. And you were to help them either work on practicing, conversational skills, work on a resume, work on all of this, whatever it is that they wanted to do, right? And I mean, as a sophomore, I think that's when I started. I don't know how to write a resume. What do I know about that stuff, right? But I said, I don't care. I'll do it. It's $15 an hour or $10 an hour or whatever it is, and I just get to hang out with someone. Great. So I ended up hanging out, working, hanging out. That's really what it was. I ended up hanging out with like 3 or 4 different people. And from what I remember, um, 2 of them were students at Penn State in the PhD programs. One of them was the spouse of a student, and then the other one just lived at Penn State or lived in the area that was trying to become a student in undergrad. So that one, the last one, the one that wasn't a student, he worked at Penn Kebab. So we used to hang out, and we'd chat, for hours. And that was it. That's my work. That's what I would do. I would chat with him. He would practice English. He would teach me Arabic or French or whatever other crazy languages he knew. And then he would feed me, and then we'd have tea at Penn Kebab, and that was it. The other 2, we'd meet at Starbucks. We'd chat, or we'd meet in, I forget the building where the economics department is at. I think it's like right off the White Loop, across the street from the library. I don't remember. It's like I want to say it's Kern, but I don't know. I could be way off. But anyway, there was a little cafe in there, and so one of my other students, we'd meet like at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock before my econ class, and a lot of times, we'd both, we'd grab a cup of coffee or whatever, and we just chat. We asked, each other about our weekends or what we did or whatever. And now he's a professor someplace in Texas, and he's living his life, doing his thing. He was a psychology PhD student focusing on labor or something. I don't really remember. It's been some time, but I still talk to him to this day. Now I don't charge him because I'm not working, and I never charged them either. But it was one of those things where, that's what I got paid to do. I got paid to hang out with people that wanted to, work on their conversation skills. And of course, you're asking probably the wrong person who's gotten, an LA accent, doesn't speak grammatically correct. And there I was,
Trying to help people learn the grammatically correct way to speak English.
That's apparently what they paid me to do. So, but yeah, that's what I did. And like I said, I worked at Mad Men's. So that put me through my 5 years at Penn State. But really, that was just my food money, my groceries, my going out money.
Your day-to-day money.
That's really what it was,
So you spent a lot of time working, you spent a lot of time studying. What were some of the things that you were involved in on campus?
Anything and everything I could get my hands into, to be quite honest. I was involved with Latino Caucus. I was president for Latino Caucus. And whatever, I think one of my friends, she ended up pitching this idea to Penn State for a diversity video. And so I worked with her to try and get it off the ground. I think that they actually ended up filming it. So we would meet with, the vice president, we would meet with the Penn State president, we'd meet with all kinds of people, to talk about different ideas or different projects, but specifically that was her thing. And like I said, she came to me, she's like, hey, where do I go? I was like, well, I don't know, but we'll figure it out. Like, I don't know how any of this works. I know nothing ever, but let's do it. And so she had a great idea. I don't know that I ever even helped her, but she got it done and I was just there. So I was like, okay, cool. Um, Part of Latino Caucus, try to put on events, whatever it might be. Went to a lot of events for other organizations. Um, but yeah, just whatever I could get into. I did a lot of everything while I was at Penn State except sleep. I didn't sleep. I think at one point I knew that I had to kind of slow down and just kind of relax because at one point I was drinking like a cup of coffee in the morning to get to class, a cup of coffee during class to stay awake, a monster for lunch, and then a monster with dinner or whatever it was, or in the evening. And then, yeah, so your face, that's how I looked, probably just always wild. But I just always felt like there was something to do. Like I gotta go. Like I just, you know, um, but eventually, like I said, I realized that it was getting to be a bit much. And so my last year, my second senior year, my fifth year, I stepped away from everything. I was like, that's it. I'm done. I don't want to be a hindrance or a barrier for the next generation of students who want to be a part of this. I'll be around if they need help, if they want, if they need some guidance, whatever I can give them. But I didn't want to take someone else's opportunity. I felt like my 3 years or my 4 years of basically trying to do everything that I possibly could, that was enough. So
I definitely felt that. And to kind of like, sum up and, wrap up the interview, do you have any special memories that you hold from Penn State, whether the good, the bad, the exciting? Do you have any memories that kind of stick out as like, wow, that was a good day, or I remember that semester?
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them. I don't know that there's any one. I remember I remember vividly we went to a Penn State game. It was like I think one of the last ones for the season, but also one of the last ones for some of my buddies that we went. And I can't tell you how hungover I was. I couldn't eat. I was just like, all I know is we're gonna get there. And I think even during time, I probably closed my eyes during the game. Um, but yeah, I just remember thinking like, this is a moment that I'm gonna remember, right?
College in a nutshell.
Yeah, college in a nutshell, right? So that was one. I remember too. I had one Mr. Latino Penn State, and I had all the friends that I had met from Penn State, both previous years. Some that had kind of graduated, um, and had one. And they gave me the little tiara, and I remember thinking, what am I gonna do with this? Okay, that's cool. But then we went to the bar and there I am with the little tiara, so I was like, all right, this is cool, I guess it's different. So that was cool because I had won. But really I don't know, I was just happier to be with everyone. Um, yeah, I remember I remember my first final thinking, oh, well, like whatever happens, happens, I did the best that I could, I remember that. Um, I remember when I brought my parents or when they came out for my graduation, and I remember walking with them. I think it even snowed on my graduation a little bit in May, which is crazy. It like flurried a little bit.
That's
Um,
so crazy. Flurries in May.
yeah, yeah. But I remember walking with them, and I think my parents and I walked the entire campus. And I remember telling my parents, I lived over there in East Halls and in Gary. Like, this is the creamery. They had already gone to the creamery, and kind of going through and pointing out the different things, whatever. And in that, in that moment, obviously we're there for the graduation, but it's a culmination of everything that's we've done. I say we, really is we. My parents played a huge role in my education, and unfortunately my sister didn't get a chance to make it out, but I'm standing there with my parents, but they're really standing in the place of all of my family, because we couldn't afford to get everyone out there, but to see my family kind of light up as we walk through Penn State and kind of go through everything, I thought, man, this is cool, man. Like, I did it. We did it. It's another one, in the books. So yeah, that was crazy experience. And then they had driven up to Penn State in that same little Yaris. And so I told my parents, well, I have a week before I got to start work. So or 2 weeks or whatever it was, I told them I want to do a road trip. So they're like, okay. So I put my parents on a train back to LA. And then with two of my buddies from Penn State, we went, I think, to Chicago to see another of our friends. We then went to North Dakota to see Mount Rushmore. We went to Denver and Vegas, and we went everywhere. So that to me will always still be part of that, like, Penn State memory. So.
And then, kind of thinking back now, and even just kind of, bringing all of these experiences together, the good, the bad. Do you feel pride in being a Penn Stater?
Oh yeah, of course. I think that that's definitely one of the things that I'll always feel with Penn State, because even, the good, the bad, whatever it might be, like, those are the types of experiences that have really helped me through a lot of the things that I've experienced in other institutions, right? When I got to law school, one of my very first experiences when I went into law school, they had assigned us our books to purchase, right? Our textbooks. And I remember getting there, and there's a group of people who were all kind of standing there. And I ended up going through this program called Scale. It's an accelerated program. So instead of doing law school in 2 years, you do it in 3, but that means you start early in June or mid-June. So I know that everyone else is part of that same program, because why else would they be buying their books? We're all starting in June. And so I remember I'm standing there in a small little bookstore. It's nothing compared to Penn State's bookstore. It's literally, probably maybe a 30 by 30 foot room, if anything. Like, it's super small. And then you have all, the aisles of books and stuff like that. And so everyone's grabbing their books, and one guy's like, hey, how are you? My name's so-and-so. And, asking everyone their name, telling them how excited they are for law school to start. And he kind of turns to me, and this is where I knew, like, this is going to be the same thing all over it. He turns to me and he's like, excuse me, you're in my way. I need to get to the book behind you, or whatever it is that he says. And I'm like, all right, cool. I'm not going to be in your class or whatever it is, right? In my mind, I'm, kind of already thinking of these things. But that's one of those things that I remembered from Penn State, and again, that's not the crux of it, but I've experienced something very similar to that at Penn State. And I think to myself, at the end of the day, that's not necessarily reflective of the institution. Penn State has still allowed me to be here. Penn State still has, this tremendous reputation behind it. It's going to be the same thing here. I just need to get through all the other little small obstacles, and so, being a Penn Stater, I think for me is much more than just going to the institution. It's the whole adventure of leaving everything that I've ever known to go 3,000 miles away at Penn State in the middle of the mountains, to brave the snow, to brave the black ice that people fall on, or to brave all these other things, and then still make it out on top and say, hey, that was a wild ride. And then to be like, okay, let's do it again for the master's program. Okay, let's do it again for my law degree. Okay, let's do it again for my career now as a lawyer. And I'm sure anybody could say, well, you could have gotten those experiences elsewhere. True. That's, probably, not necessarily up for debate, but it doesn't take from the fact that I learned a lot of who I am because of Penn State. And I also got to see a different perspective on life because of Penn State. And I won't lie, it's super cool when, people see my, Penn State alum license plate, or they find out, they say, you went to Penn State? Like, all, shocked or whatever it might be. And I'm like, yeah, I went to Penn State, or, whatever, right? People look at you a little bit different. Like, they realize that you got some worth to you, that you're not just like everyone else, right? And I can't say that because of Penn State I have more worth, but I think that it's another marker, another indicator that being able to be a Penn Stater is just a tremendous thing.
As well. Thank you so much for taking the time to tell me your story, tell me your experiences.